Comfortable silences, Adriana.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our masterclass today. I'm really thrilled. The registrations went absolutely nuts for this session. So we have about 700 people that have signed up. I can see that people are still coming on through. So who knew that creating a financial modeling a world-class financial model was going to be such a wildly successful thing? So Lance, you're a star. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we kick off, just want to let you know that this session will be recorded and shared with you. And we really do encourage you to, make the most out of this. So use the chat function, ask questions in the Q&A box. Lance is going to do his best, and I will do my best to monitor that. And we will be sharing the workbooks and the content as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. For some background, this session is obviously part of our CFO community, which is around 5,000 CFOs across Australia. And we bring masterclasses, summits, awards, and they're brought to you. Underneath it all is the team from Wheel. Wheel is Australia's leading spend management solution. And so we bring you virtual corporate cards, reimbursement, bill payments, and subscription management. And so that all, is clearly related to the spending that's going on within your business. So that feeds into your accounting software, whether that be Xero, NetSuite, and from there, it really allows you to improve your tracking and management of spending. So whilst Lance has created a lot of this session to work with the data that we have in Wheel, I know it's also going to be customizable for those that are going to be using an export from wherever their spending transactions are kept. So I hope you get a lot of value out of this as well. Lance, I'm going to hand it over to you. And again, I reiterate, chuck in the questions, the chat, any other feedback that you might have. Always happy to hear about it. So I'll stop my sharing, and Lance, your first test is getting the share going. And
okay,
I'm sure you'll be
let's go. All good. We've got it. Thank you. Thanks, Adriana. Thanks, everyone. Welcome. Adriana, I think this is your fault, right? We got into a whole debate of, financial modeling World Cup, and you were stunned and shocked. And so I'm going to go back at, well, if people don't know about it, let's talk about what world class is. Let's talk about world-class financial modeling, because it's actually a pretty cool skill to have.
Well, I actually spoke to the founder yesterday of the Financial Modeling World Cup. So that is going to come out on the podcast in a couple of days.
Andrew G, well done.
Yeah, he actually said in a month there is going to be one of the rounds that is in Australian time. And so I'm going to share the link. Maybe everyone wants to throw a hat in the ring. He says it's a bit of fun, but also a really good training ground as well. So even to watch along and see how people build these models. So yeah, I've actually become really interested in these sort of athletes and the esports of financial modeling. It's pretty cool on YouTube. So yeah, check it out.
Cool. So, if you're not competing in esports, you're trying to build your model. So I thought off the back of that, let's put some structure around what world-class financial modeling is. You'll notice I'm using Excel to do even presentations and slides here, but importantly, we're going to go through this. We're going to go through the workbook. You obviously, as Adriana said, you're going to get access to this workbook after. But I think the key thing is it's really hard. People think that just being good at Excel means that you're world class, and it doesn't necessarily mean that. Yes, you need to be good at Excel as part of that, but really to be world-class financial modeler, you really need to comply with some of the standards in loose terms. And the reason I say loose terms is because modeling is part art, part science. The science part is, of course, it's got to be accurate. It's got to have P&L balance sheets, not always a three-way, but in many cases, a three-way is more accurate. But of course, just really making sure that it works correctly. But then there's this other element of the art, which is about, does it meet the need of the user? And of course, there's so many different users and there's so many different things that they want. So sometimes that's why I say loose terms. So we're going to use the acronym FAST. Although I use a different standard to build our models, we are still somewhat compliant with these principles around FAST. So flexible, appropriate, structured, and transparent. So if you want to measure your own modeling skills, you want to compare a model against world class, this is a great way to do it. And we're going to do that in the context of this workbook, so you can see what are the things I'm looking for each of the parts of FAST, and go through that. So that's the first bit. The next bit is really, can we use it, and is it easy to see and understand and pitch what's being sold or what's being estimated? So in the end, the whole purpose of building a model is to make a decision. And often we're not the decision makers, we're enabling that decision. So if what we build doesn't enable the person to use it easily, to understand it, to see the story and really understand and make an informed decision, well, then that's not world class. That's just spreadsheeting and overload and data overload. And yes, we know that there can be really complex calculations, lots of data that we need to deal with. And there is a lot of complexity, but we need to make that simple. So it's really about achieving the strategic goal, enabling those decisions, and really helping people understand what decisions they need to make. The next element is errors, right? We just know that there are errors. We're human, we make errors. But does the workbook have error prevention, error trapping, and error checking? And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, because that is really your lifeline to make sure that your model works well. And if you don't have that, again, you can't consider that a world-class model, because, as I said, every single human will make a mistake, and we're under pressure often when we're building these models, and things do happen. So how do we make the model build in such a way that it finds or detects or prevents, in many cases, the error that will always creep in for some other reason? And then the last one is, can we go back when we've built the model? Can we go back and understand and check it? Or do we have to then, think about and revisit all of the complexity to really get our heads right? So it's not about building it for that one time only. It's actually about, can we build it in a way that it's repeatable? Can we go back to the model, or do we have to start from scratch every time we're doing the model? Again, that wouldn't be world class. We need to try and find a way that we can roll the model, or bring in new data, or look at new scenarios. Reality is very volatile. Trading conditions are very volatile. So we need to try and understand, how do we do that, and how do we make that repeatable and go back and easy to use for us, let alone other people, but how do we make sure that it's easy for us to use? So control down I'm using just to flip through to these different slides. We're going to do, I think, Adriana, we said we were going to do a whole thing on shortcut keys or micro learning at some stage. But if you see me jumping around, a lot of the time I'm just using the shortcut keys. I'll use a little bit of my mouse as well, like I'm going to do now. So let's break down fast, and let's have some of these really, really clear definitions. And I've got a nice little checkbox here. So does the model contain a scenario manager for multiple assumption changes? So we're going to go through and say, well, if you don't have a model, then if you don't have a scenario manager, you technically don't have a model. because a model is about looking at different things and different options and different scenarios. It's modeling the future. It's looking at something from various perspectives. So if you don't have a way to do that nice and easily, well, then it's just a spreadsheet. So a model is really important to do scenarios. It's also really easy to run sensitivity. So can I do sensitivity analysis? Now, sensitivities is where I'm changing one of those key variables. Maybe it's price, maybe it's volume. And you want to see how sensitive is profit to those changes. And that's quite important. The other thing about being flexible is the formulas, right? The formulas have to flow. They can't be any hard coding. And the moment you have hard coding in your model, guess what? You completely break flexibility, because now that this number that's put into the formula is going to hardwire the answer to a particular outcome. So if I see a formula and then I see plus 1,527, firstly, I don't know what that is. How did it come up? Does it need to change? What are the dependencies? Where does it come from? And we've got to take those things out and put them separately as an assumption if it's that important. Yes, if we want to do a last minute change and get the number right, not ideal, but we've got to really make sure that that is avoided in many cases. The next one is appropriate, and please, I'm happy to take some questions on the chat or elsewhere as we go, if you've got any questions on these. The next one is appropriate. Does it meet the needs of the user, or is it too complex to understand? So when we're trying to build a model, we need to try and understand, well, what's the decision we're trying to make? Is it appropriate, and does it meet the need of the user? And quite often, it's not us that's using it. It might be a head of business, or it might be the CEO, it might be the management team, it might be the board. So we need to really understand, does it meet their needs? And if we're not sure what that need is, preparing a budget is not a need. Making decisions around how you allocate resources is a need. So don't think about the what, think about the why. So yes, a budget is useful, but if the budget's not aligned to strategy, or it's not enabling me to make better decisions, then it's going to lose the true meaning and value of what you're building. So does it actually answer the business or strategic question? So yes, every business should be doing budgets. Managing their expenses is one of those. But what's the strategy around expense control? What is the strategy around growing marketing? And what are the things that we need to watch out for? And does our model align to that? So is it appropriate? If it's not, then we're off in the woods somewhere else, right? We need to make sure that we're aligned to strategy, we're aligned to the business purpose, and that's the appropriateness of that model. Now, the next bit is actually really, really difficult to achieve. So does it have the appropriate level of balance between simple but not simplistic? Now, I know that sounds like one and the same thing, but what we're saying is a model needs to be simple to use, but not overly simplistic that it's inaccurate. So what do I mean by that? Let's take expenses, right? And that's often what we talk about. So we've got expense and we've got expense growth. Now, a very simple or simplistic way to forecast expenses is just to assume the last 12 months and a growth rate of 5%. That is overly simplistic. Now, we know that expenses don't go up year on year simply by a percentage. Expenses go up based on activity. How many times we're going to travel, how much staff we have, what is the average spend per staff, what are the various things we need to do to deliver our product or our service. Is there entertainment? How many events are we going to hold? All of these things are underlying drivers of what drives expenses. So we can have all of that, and then we can have a really simple interface to make it easy to change those things. So we're going to go through that. That's through the scenario manager. So we definitely need to simplify the model, but not simplify it to the point that it's overly simplistic, because then we can't make the right decision. If you're trying to manage expenses and we've just built it as a percentage on prior period, how do you actually communicate to someone who, let's say, Adriana looks after marketing, and I've got to say to Adriana, you can only spend 3% more than last year. Yes, that's somewhat helpful, but it would be great to say, well, this is how many events you can run. This is how many webinars you can run. This is what you can spend on social media and all those things, and actually break it down to those different parts, will actually be more valuable than just saying, well, here's your number, then you making it someone else's problem. Rather help people to enable them to make better decisions and work with them in terms of what are the underlying drivers, as opposed to it's just a percentage increase. Adriana, sorry, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to like really reiterate what I find really effective. And I know it'll be different for each business, but for me with our CFO, I understand to the level of detail about, how much a new customer is worth to us, how much, it's all pegged to then how much I can spend and, payback and the metrics that he's really looking at as well. And I think that rather than, and what that means is you're almost like, I hate the word empowering, but rather than you being a naysayer to marketing, like, you can't spend on that campaign, it's just saying, well, does it fit in our business framework? And you're kind of working together rather than, and like, it works really well for us. And like, we've got a much better relationship for finance because of that, because we're thinking almost in the same metrics rather than just this like, please, can we have some money kind of approach, which is, probably not the healthiest. Anyway.
It's not, Adrian. And I think what the relationship between marketing and finance is always a tricky one, right? Because marketing is always putting their hand up saying, give me money. Finance is always saying, show me the money. Where's it going? What are you spending it on? You guys are just, having fun time going on travels and having all these events. That's all good. But where's the ROI? Where's the return on my investment? Yeah. And I think that's a great way to bring those two together. The next one is structured. So, do you have a very clear start and end point, right? That's the first bit. Or is it a spaghetti mess or spider web of just a whole bunch of sheets and worksheets and calculations? If we don't understand where it starts and where it ends, we're never going to find out. So if I just click this hamburger menu, this model starts with the setup. I'm actually on the world-class ingredients slide, which is, of course, you wouldn't necessarily have this in all your models. But then I have my data. So there's a chronological order to this. I've got a file setup procedure. I've got data, which comes through. I've got some pivot tables, which I can look at the data. So section 2 is all about the data. Section 3 is about the forecast and the scenarios and calculations. So this is more about the calculations that are going to get used for dashboards and the forecasting. Section 4 is the dashboards that are relating to backward looking. Section 5 is the forward looking dashboards, top down, bottom up. Section 6 is a helper or appendix. And section 7 is validation check. So really easy to see data coming in, in 2s, calculations in 3s, and outputs in 4s and 5s, and then 6 and 7 is ready to support. So I can clearly see just by talking to you, the process and the structure of this workbook, and people know where they're going. I've also got structure in terms of how it's highlighted and the different colors that we've used in the different tabs. There's people that create table of contents, which is, well, obviously you can also do, but of course, this is a nice little bit of VBA code with a hamburger menu. Structure also refers to the way in which the formulas are structured, and we'll go through an example of that. So it's not just having things scattered all over the place, having a real structure in terms of your time series. What is my actual data? What is my forecast data? And is it really clear to see the handoff between actuals and forecast or budget and comparing those? So that's an important part of structure. Is it horizontal or is it vertical? These are really, really important. Now, new formulas like dynamic arrays gives you that structure. It really helps you to build some of that structure. Dynamic arrays are very structured. Same as structured references, which we've also used in this workbook. The last one is transparency and transparent. So are all sheets, rows, and columns visible, or are they hidden from the user? Now, I know that in some cases you might not want to show certain things because there's calculations and there's complexity, and you might want to hide it. So you've got to think about who the audience is, what's the user. But in most cases, we shouldn't be hiding things. We should really, if we want to hide columns or rows, because we've got a whole bunch of calculations, don't hide, group. So what I'm going to show you is, grouping. If you've never used grouping, definitely an area to explore. So I can still, make it easy to see and navigate by grouping cells together, but it's not hidden. You know that there's something in it. There's nothing worse than finding a formula that makes reference to something that's hidden. And now you've got to go and find that hidden thing, that cell reference that's hidden, or the sheet that's hidden. And for those that don't know, you've actually can deep hide something. So it's actually, you hide it in the VBA code. It's called deep hidden. And we've seen instances of that as well. So your question is, why are we hiding stuff? We shouldn't be. We really want to make sure that people understand what's going on. And then, of course, have you got some funky code running that nobody understands, right? So VBA can be great, but it can also be very dangerous. So making sure that we're not hiding things and hiding calculations. And that's important, not just because it's easy for the user to use, but if for whatever reason someone else wants to understand what you've done, then they can follow the logic. They can follow and understand that. Of course, if you get a model that gets audited, and we've built quite a few models for project finance, for IPOs, these models, when they get audited, have to be transparent. And if they're not, then you won't pass the audit. So that's an important distinction there. So when we're starting to look at this very workbook, let's start to tick off some of these things. So flexibility. So there's a scenario manager that's built in. It's got the key assumptions, not all the assumptions, and some of the outputs. So the scenario manager is very, very powerful, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to play with some of the scenarios, play with some of the drivers, and look at how that gets adjusted in some of the outputs. So again, I've got hyperlinks here. I can just click onto the scenario manager. In the scenario manager, and I'll zoom in just quickly. So what we've got is we have our different cases: best, worst, and base. And by clicking each of these, I can see my results. I've got 2 years of actuals. I've got 2 years of forecast. And this is an important thing to use. Now, why is it important? Because really you're trying to give the user an understanding. Now, this is a forecasting process, and we've got many different ways to forecast. You've got bottom up, you've got top down, and even in bottom up, you've got, in this model, we've actually got bottom up on an individual basis. So that's where we're going to individuals, and let's say there's the sales team, and they're going to have it exactly like if I was having a discussion with Adriana, talk about Adriana, okay, you've got this, who's going to spend what, and what are their targets, and how they're going to, obviously there's a salesperson, there's a marketing person, and we need to understand what each person's going to spend and what each person's going to achieve. So that would be bottom up on an individual basis. Then you might have, divisional heads that would do, okay, I've got a team of 15 people, and this is what we're going to spend as a team, and therefore this is what we're going to have at a total. And then you have top down, which is often the finance team or the executive suite that say, look, we know what our numbers are at a high level, we're going to use that. So in this model, we've actually allowed you to change the mix of what's the ultimate forecast. And the mix of that is between top down, bottom up, and across these different scenarios, we can change that. So if I wanted to make that the same across everything, well, I can just go Control R, and now they're all the same. Now, when I change these scenarios are not impacted by the mix weighting. But let's say I had another different situation where I don't trust the bottom up. And why wouldn't I trust it? We all know people are more conservative. If Adriana wants more money to spend, and the salespeople want less targets to achieve, right? So, that kind of doesn't work. So there's a natural bias towards overachieving and pushing the budget as low as possible. From an expense side, you want to push the expense budget as high as possible. So there's that tension, and that's where you have this bottom up, top down tension. But if I wanted to go back to my drivers and look at volume and unit pricing, so I can look at the impacts of all of those. Or what happens if we have a price decrease, the worst case scenario? Well, the profit margin is going to drop to 47 and 41%. Okay, yes, it's better than the past, but it's still not great. Our base scenario, we're turning a profit in 2025, and our best scenario actually is much better. And that is driven by these scenarios and these different price points, and of course the weighting of that. So what we are doing is we make it really easy for people to make some tweaks and changes. We've got unit pricing, we've got volume, we've got unit price growth as well. So, you've got an additional overlay. So we call this an overlay because we have an existing price, and we're gonna bump that price up. We're gonna add additional pricing. For whatever reason, we might not be able to do that. So I guess we can change that here. And then, of course, beyond that point, there's a growth rate and a growth curve around price. And then volume as well. We've got the same thing for expenses, volume unit cost as opposed to price, and not sales price. This is a cost. And then, of course, we've got the cost growth rate. And we know that obviously these are very low. We're probably at hopefully a 6% inflation rate at the moment, waiting for the announcement soon. But, in the past, it's been around 3%. Of course, this is where you'd put in those scenarios and you'd put in those numbers to make sure. So if you don't have something that's this easy to use and understand, and this is what I mean by simple, right? This is really simple to get your head around. We focus on the key things. We enable people to nice and easily click through the different scenarios. There is no VBA here. This is just simply using, index and match with a bit of choose. Of course, there's a button here that allows us to change all of that, and that's just conditional based on that. So it's actually quite easy to create a scenario manager without the need of VBA. So an important thing, if you've never done one or never created one, definitely look at it. The next one is appropriate. So what's the purpose of this workbook? Here we are trying to give an understanding of our forecast and our budget, comparing our budget to actuals and prior periods so that we can truly understand our performance and manage our expenses, but also look at what targets we're setting for our team. So I want to look at this expense and budget report. So I'm going to look into this and I can change this over different periods. So I want to see what the run rate is. I want to look at my actual year to date, my prior actual versus budget, and see those variances. So that's an important thing to really hone in on in terms of what is going to be my forecasts and looking at all of those and comparing all of those. So, and then we might have some commentary in here. So important to understand what does the user really want to look at? What do they want to see? What do they want to understand? Is my actuals and my budget, and how does that compare to prior year? Am I above or below? Is this too conservative? Is it overly aggressive? We need to really understand all of those. So the appropriateness of this particular workbook is to obviously enable decision making. And of course, it's also appropriate that we have that scenario manager, because that's how we're going to use the model to understand that. Structure, I explained structure on a workbook level. If I show you structure on a formula level, this is highly structured. Now you can see here, I'm not hiding things. I'm just expanding it through grouping. You can see all of those, but you can see this is highly structured. And I'm just expanding all of those. I have my time series at the top, and it's very, very well blocked in terms of how that's structured, and allows me to look across the time series. So I have the same time series going out. That's actuals. Of course, forecasts won't have anything in it. If I, let's say, look at our bottom up from individuals, and we look at our forecast data, we can start looking at volume and price and all those sort of things. So I can really drill down and look at that structure. So here, by using grouping, I can actually see and look at, and here's our scenario overlay for individuals. Ultimately, this is where we can start to get some structure and flow and look at how things are built. One of the things that breaks structure, and it really, I see it so often, we go month, 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 and there's a total column for a quarter, and there's a month, 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 and total column for the next quarter. That's not structured. That is actually really, really bad, because I can't copy to the right. The formulas are inconsistent, and it's actually a very bad structure. If I want to roll up to annuals, then of course I can do that. There are other ways I can do that in other formulas, and I can aggregate to quarters. So an important thing about structure is really, how do we structure the layout and the designing of that formula, the worksheet, the cells? If we're not well structured, we're in a bad place. Transparency. So where's the information coming from? Where's the charts and the data? If we had to look at some of the dashboards, where's all this data coming from? But we actually have a sheet which we actually call out. These are the actuals data. This is structured again. This is actuals. This is budget, and we've got all of that information here. And this particular calculation set it changes as we change the different drop downs in terms of the time periods. So really important that it's transparent and there's nothing that's hidden. All of that information in terms of the budget data here. I actually haven't grouped any of that, all of that information is available and people can see. We've got our live data, we've got our 3 months, we've got our rolling information. So all of that helps us get really structured and transparent so that people can really use and understand what we've done. So I guess that's really the part of the presentation, but I want to go into a little bit more detail, but I wanted to think just to check if there's any questions at this point in time, or there's anyone on the chat that want me to focus on anything in particular that I've just covered. Otherwise, I'll continue on. Adriana, there's no...
I reckon you're good to go on.
Okay, cool. So let's look at each of the components of the model. Yes, the recording will be available, Ivy. So this is a table. For those that don't know tables, an important feature of Excel. Tables have been around for a very long time, but tables is a great way to have structure again. And as Adriana said, this is built with the idea that you can bring in the wheel expense data straight into it using Power Query. Of course, this is where you would use Power Query in bringing all this data, but you can, of course, use any other expense data, provided it's got the structure. If you want to change the structure, of course you can, but just be aware of all the calculations that flow off the back of that. So our data, now we want to look at our actuals, our budget. We've got to interrogate the data. We've got some pivot tables. We want to look at particular merchants, for example. If we want to look at particular automotives or whatever it is we want to look at, car rental, all of these things is really useful to understand the data. And then we have some pivot charts with some slices. So again, this is only backward looking. So all the data that's going in is in this section. So everything relating to whether it's the report that we're looking at or whether it's the pivot chart. If I want to look at Q2, I want to look at accommodation, all of that I can see, and it's all available. So the key thing here is really, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to understand the past. I'm trying to use the information to really start forming what's the story and what do I need to focus on? Where are the big expenses in these different areas, and let's go look at those and focus on those. We've got multiple currencies as well. Then we get into the next section, which is about the forecast. And as I showed you here, we have the forecast in multiple areas. So I'm going to just collapse that again. I have a nice, well structured. I have my top down, bottom up by individual, bottom up by division, and then our ultimate forecast is what we're going at. So I'm going to just look at that for a moment. So what we are doing here is, as we said, we have a mix of top down, bottom up, in terms of individuals and divisions. And now we want to create a weighting of how that's going to be applied. So we have that particular weighting. This particular scenario is in the base scenario. If I go back to my scenario manager for a moment, so I'm just going to click down here and I'm going to change this to best scenario. And then I'm going to go back to my actuals and forecast. Now that percentage would have changed. So 50, 30, 20. I go back to my scenario manager, 50, 30, 20. Oh, actually, that doesn't help. So let's go 45, 35, and 20. So now and that's under the worst scenario. Let's copy that to my best scenario. Maybe we make this 40, 30, 30. So if I'm in my best scenario, I go back to my calculations where I'm looking at my actual forecast. It changes for me automatically. So I'm not going back and forth and how to do all of that. This is really just understanding how do we use that and how do we make some of those changes. And I'm not having to then go and recalculate and change all the logic. So it's all in one place, nice and easy. So 45, 35, 20, that's my best scenario. If I go back to my scenario manager and I use the worst case, then that all changes. Now that's 40, 30, 30. I can then go in and look at my forecast, and that's 40, 30, 30. So all of that will change nice and easily without me having to do it. So how would I create? So there's a question there around how do I create the scenario manager without the button? In-cell data validation would be my answer. So what I would do here is I would I'd basically create a data validation in terms of the particular. So data validation. So we're going to choose a list. Let's choose this. Enter. Okay. And now I can choose base, best, worst. And this formula looks up base, best, and worst and chooses it based on that. So now all I'm doing here, rather than P choose scenario, which is the cell behind the box, I can just select cell G2, and that'll enable me to do the same without using the button. So it is absolutely possible to do a scenario manager without. The key thing here is using, the choose function, or you can use index match as well, and really making sure that all the calculations. This is the live scenario. So when I change this changes, and that's what I'll link back to my calculations. So this is available, obviously when you set up the model in that way. I think that answers, Tristan, your question. I think we've got another one. Where might I check out scenario tool you set up with index, match, and choose? I've been slogging away with built-in scenario manager. Please don't use the built-in scenario manager. I've never used it. It doesn't work. It's not intuitive. You just need to create something like this. You will get access to this workbook and you can use it and you can see how I've built it. This has got the button, so it's nice and cool and it's interactive. But of course, you can definitely have it available and you can build it very similar. It's just using that particular formula. It sounds like I'm in the middle of KFC or KYC. Sorry.
We had someone, I think, referencing Wheel, that they can't get through to the product, but I think they're just
okay.
KYC. So it was a bit of a separate one. If someone wants to access Wheel, and as we're a financial product, we have to go through a process of KYC and upload documents. So I will get someone to contact you. Sorry about that.
No, all good, all good. So anonymous attendee, is there a template provided for this model? Yes, if you come to Excel Cloud, we do have lots of different templates and dashboards that we can use. So you can definitely come to Excel Cloud. I'll just type it in here, www.excelcloud.io. There's definitely a range, including the wheel. Not this particular one. This particular one has been tailored for this session, but you will be getting this one anyway. So you will be able to use it, delete the data, reuse it, bring new data in, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this is really an important thing around how we get structured with our formulas, our logic, and then looking at some of the dashboards. So I guess the key thing is for the users of those particular dashboards. Now, in this particular example, it's only one company. We don't have tracking categories, but in Excel Cloud, we've got others that have that. It's certainly useful for that. Sorry, I hate it when my bottom thing drops up. But on Excel Cloud, we do have this dashboard, which you can look at different tracking categories. We just don't have that in the data set that we've got here. There's a scenario manager. There's a question, can I look at scenarios side by side? Absolutely. Guess what? We have our forecast scenario dashboard. So here we can look at the particular elements. We can look at each of these. Actually, I think it's not in this particular one. I think we have it in one of our other dashboards where we've got each of the scenarios side by side. On this particular forecast, what we're looking at is top down, bottom up, and this is the weighted outcome for scenarios. But as I said, we do have other workbooks that do allow. You do need to run a bit of VBA to do that. So if you are wanting to look at scenarios side by side, because everything's been calculated, so you need to calculate it, copy and paste it into a structure, and then have that available. So if you are going to want to compare scenarios side by side, without flicking these particular buttons. But, you can also do, a screen print. You can do copy paste. You can take the scenario, change the button, copy it and paste it. That's another way to compare those side by side. These are all interactive. So if I change worst, it changes these as well. It changes that as well. So it changes it everywhere. Allows us to look. Here we can look at particular, we can drill down in particular items of expenses as well. And it makes it really useful for that. So it is possible to have that side by side. I thought in this workbook we don't have it, but we do have it in some others. Okay, there's quite a stream of questions. Let me just have a look at these. So in the scenario solution for base, best, worst, are you having a spreadsheet output for each year? Yes, well, this is the output for each year. So this is total revenue, total expenses in the scenario manager. What I did was, because quite often you want to see this as you make the changes. So if I'm going to make a change here, I want to see the impact across the years there at the same time as I'm making the changes. So scenario managers are quite important, so we can use the information and actually look at that alongside the outputs. Because if we're just changing the scenarios and then we've got to look at, okay, what is the impact of that? We want to be able to see the impact straight away. So that allows us to do that. So in this best case scenario, let's bump this up. Let's double this. This is 20, 40, 60. Well, look at my margin will suddenly jump up massively. And now we're doing 1.1 and $1.4 million profit. Go back to my worst case and it's back down again. So this is why it's so important in the scenario manager to link the outputs with the forecast and allow you to change that live. Is there a MacBook user? So Excel Cloud will work on a Mac with either Bootcamp or Parallels. So you will have to run, Microsoft Excel. It's different. Excel for Mac is different for Excel for PC. And yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work on Excel for Mac, but it does work running Bootcamp or Parallels in a Mac. If you so Ash, if you want to look at that, you definitely can. Okay, other questions in this? I think we've answered that. For example, just for 2023 side by side. Well, 2023 is actuals. So in this model, JK, it's actual. So it's never going to change, because 2023 is actual. So you're not going to run scenarios on a past period. This is just running scenarios on the forecast 2024, 25, and comparing that. So you don't typically run scenarios on the past, because past is the past and it is what it is. You can't change the past. You can change the future, but you can't change the past, unfortunately. So I think that's pretty much it. We've got 2 minutes left. Any other questions? Any other thing that people want?
I think that a lot of people would like you to just sit next to them while they're working through it. I've got another question from Ash. Do we need to data dump the actuals, or will it sync with the accounting software?
So Excel Cloud does sync with Xero. So you need to just click. So on the setup, I'll just show you here on the setup. There's no API for Wheel at the moment. So we are using Power Query. Go back to previous recordings. Adriana, I think maybe someone can reach out to Ash for that. But on our previous sessions, we actually showed how did we bring the data in through Power Query. Excel Cloud does have the ability to pull through the API, P&L, balance sheet, cash flows. I might just quickly open up the menu here and we can have a quick look. But there's definitely, of course, I didn't expect to do this now for this session, so I'm going to have to abandon that for the moment.
I'll send through the previous recording. We've actually got a it's an online platform where you can access all of the information and the resources. So I'll pop that link in now, and it'll also come through in your follow-up email as well. So you can access that.
Right. Penny, how did we create the menu, the hamburger menu? VBA, right? It's a VBA, it's a button. When you click here, assign macro, it's using the the hamburger menu button. And so this is a little bit around, show navigation, which, it's this particular macro. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole at the moment, but if you go into your developer and you go to macros, you can start to look at that. But again, you're going to have access to this file. If you know VBA, you can go in and you can go and grab the VBA code, which will be sitting here. So, go for your life, copy, paste it, put her in, put the icon in, assign the button to the macro, and away you go. That's how you would use it. The Google Workspace, unfortunately not. The Google Sheets and Excel are not, they don't necessarily, and particularly VBA is not the same. There's no Power Query in Google Sheets. So sorry for those Google people out there, but yeah, Excel is the finance. I know a lot of people we use Google for other things, but when it comes to proper modeling and data and using all of that, we tend to stick with Excel. Particularly now we've got ChatGPT integration, we've got a whole bunch of other add-ins and add-in technologies and lambdas and dynamic arrays. There's a lot of super cool tech, and Excel, Microsoft are not giving up Excel very quickly. Excel's not dead. They're putting a lot of time into building and innovating the platform. So there's definitely, it's definitely a better product in my mind for modeling. Yes, Google Sheets works better for collaboration, but we definitely have, and there's other workbooks and that you can look at, and other examples, which if you're not on the Circle app, it's the social Circle, definitely join. I've shared a lot of things there. I'll continue to share information, so please join me there. And stay tuned for our next session, on our next masterclass session for spend control on the 10th of August. I think Tyler's going to be involved there, so definitely if you want to have a look, and last minute poll for those that want to hear more or want to help your team, or you want to, you've got a model that you want to just check best practice, or you want to do some Power BI work or automation, let us know. We do this for free. We try and help the community. We try and help this. But we also run a business. So if you do want to, you do need some help, and you want to get better value out of decision making, then please reach out. And if you haven't looked at Wheel, absolutely have a look. And now you've got some really cool dashboards and models off the back of the data that they produce. So and definitely have a look at the previous recorded sessions.
So recap. In the chat box there, you've got the invitation to join that Circle community where you can get all of the resources. Lance has done a few sessions with us, so there are the recordings there and the workbooks as well. You've got next masterclass sign up as well. And you've also got the poll there. If you'd like to hear from Lance and Model Citizen, I highly encourage you guys to check that out there. So lots of different choices. Oh, Karma's on here. Hi, Karma. So yeah, thank you very much. If anyone's got some more questions, probably got one more minute. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Again, I think you've probably got my email. If you've got any things that you'd love to hear about, any more sessions like this, I'll do my best to find someone who's going to be best placed to teach us on the area of desire. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great day, great Thursday, and we will hopefully see you very soon. Lance, always a pleasure.
Thanks, Adriana, and thanks everyone, and thanks to the Wheel team for hosting me again. And I aim to please, and looks like we've got quite a few people that are happy, which is always good.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay. See you, everyone.
Thanks all.